My name is Dolores Whitman. I'm 68 years old, and most days I speak more to the kettle than to any living soul. It whistles when it boils, even when I don't ask it to. That's more than I can say for my sons. This house used to be loud. Years ago, I'd walk through that front door and trip over sneakers, toy trucks, school papers spread across the floor like the wind had scattered them. I used to grumble and pick them up anyway. I used to hum while folding socks. I used to forget what silence sounded like. Now, silence has found its home in these walls. I live in the last piece of land my husband and I ever owned, a patch of earth carved out of what was once a working orchard. We built a life here, one tree at a time. My husband planted each row himself back when his knees still worked, and I held the clipboard, pretending I knew how to organize anything. When he died, the trees were just beginning to fruit. It felt wrong to pick the apples that year, like taking joy from a season he wouldn't see. After his funeral, my sons, Michael and Ryan, gathered around the kitchen table. "You should sell most of the land, Mom," Michael said gently, with that professional voice he always used when he wanted to sound like he wasn't pushing. "It's just you now. We'll take care of you." They were right, in a way. I didn't need acres. I needed heat in the winter and enough to cover blood pressure medication when my refill came around. And they were starting their own lives. One had just had a baby. The other was about to close on his first home. I told myself I wasn't giving anything away. I was passing it forward. So I signed the papers, sold the orchard and the north field, gave them equal shares, kept only the slice with the old house, the same one I raised them in. In return, they promised to send me something small each month, just enough so I wouldn't have to choose between groceries and heating oil. "Let us give back to you now, Mom," Ryan said. "You've done enough." At first, they kept their word. A few hundred here and there, just enough to hold the line. I'd smile each time it arrived, not because of the money, but because it meant they were still thinking of me, still remembering. Then the months got longer. One missed transfer, then another, then nothing. I didn't ask twice. I was raised not to beg, especially not from your own children. I turned the thermostat down, canceled cable, started making soup from leftover rice and boiled carrots, telling myself it was good for the heart. There's a sort of quiet pride in getting by with less, until you're left with nothing at all. I learned to listen for the sound of the mailbox. Some days, I swore I could hear hope in the rustle of junk mail. But there were no more envelopes with their names on them, no birthday cards from the grandchildren, no calls, not even at Thanksgiving. But still, I didn't feel angry, just forgotten. I kept their photos on the mantle, Michael's wedding, Ryan holding his firstborn. Sometimes I'd wipe the glass clean and whisper old stories into the silence, as if the walls could carry them back. One morning in December, I woke with a pain in my shoulder so sharp it felt like punishment. I sat up slowly, my breath catching in my chest. The house was cold. My toes had gone numb in the night. I reached for the extra blanket I kept folded at the foot of the bed and wrapped it tight across my shoulders. It was 10 days before Christmas. I checked the fridge. 1 egg, 2 slices of ham, a nearly empty jar of mustard. Not enough for a holiday, not even enough for dignity. So I made a decision. Not proud, not defiant, just tired. I would go to Michael's house, not to beg, not even to ask. Just to be. To sit at a table and hear someone laugh. To remind myself I still existed in someone's family. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want him to have time to say no. I pulled my wool coat from the back closet, the one with the tear under the arm I hadn't gotten around to fixing, brushed off the dust, picked up my purse with careful hands, and I left the house that no longer remembered laughter. The cab ride to Michael's house took 34 minutes. I watched the streets blur past, holiday lights blinking from rooftops and porch railings, little reindeer in plastic herds frozen mid-prance. The world seemed busy with joy. I sat in the back seat, hands folded around my worn leather purse, silently counting intersections like prayers. I hadn't seen Michael in person for almost a year. When we passed the old fire station, I adjusted my scarf. I don't know why I suddenly felt so small. Maybe because I knew I didn't belong there anymore, not really. But still, some part of me clung to the hope that he'd open the door and say, "Mom, you're just in time." It was Christmas Eve, after all. The cab pulled up to his house, a 2-story colonial with bay windows trimmed in garland. Warm yellow light glowed from the kitchen. I could smell roasted turkey and cinnamon even before I stepped out. The windows were steamed over. The laughter inside had a weight to it, full and comfortable. Like people who never worried about being turned away. I paid the driver with 3 wrinkled bills and stood at the door. My fingers hovered over the bell before I pressed it. The sound echoed louder than I remembered. I tugged at my coat sleeves and straightened my back. For 1 second, I felt just like I used to, like a mother visiting her grown child, like someone with a name and a place. Michael opened the door. He looked different, thicker around the middle, wearing a fleece pullover with the logo of some company I didn't recognize. He blinked, then frowned. "Mom? What are you doing here?" I smiled, softly, nervously. "I thought I'd surprise you. It's Christmas Eve. I didn't have any plans, and, well, I thought I might stay a few days. Just until the 5th. The pension comes in then." He didn't step aside, just looked over his shoulder. I followed his gaze and caught sight of the living room. His wife's parents were sitting on the couch, matching reindeer sweaters, sipping something warm from china teacups. The kids were on the floor, laughing over gingerbread houses. Everything sparkled. "I wish you'd called first," Michael said, lowering his voice. "It was meant to be a surprise," I whispered, pulling my coat tighter. "I don't want to be a bother. It's cold, sweetheart. Could I come in?" He hesitated. "There's really no space, Mom," he said flatly. "We already have guests. The kids are in the spare room and it's already tight." I blinked. "Not even the couch? Just for the night?" "Ryan might have a room," he offered, voice suddenly efficient. "Try him. He's in New Haven, right?" He reached into his wallet and pulled out a bill, $50. He didn't even count it before pressing it into my hand like a delivery receipt. "Here, for a cab." My fingers closed around it out of habit. I didn't look down. I just nodded, lips pressed tight. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to ask if he had any leftovers. I wanted to ask if I could use the bathroom, but the words caught somewhere between my heart and my throat. Behind him, I saw the tree. Tall. Perfect. Lights dancing. Stockings with embroidered names. None of them mine. Michael didn't invite me in. He didn't ask if I had eaten. He didn't ask if I was okay. Just stood there, waiting for me to leave. So I turned. Walked down the porch steps slowly, careful not to slip on the icy pavement. I didn't look back. The snowflakes landed on my scarf, delicate and cruel. My boots crunched softly with each step, like the sound of something breaking very quietly. When the cab drove away, I stood on the corner for a moment, uncertain. I had nowhere to go. I held the $50 bill like it meant more than it did, like maybe it could buy back a little warmth. It couldn't. Michael had a full house, a table set for 10, extra chairs borrowed from the garage, matching napkins folded like swans. He had room for in-laws and appetizers and polished wine glasses. But not for me. Not for the woman who used to sew the buttons back on his coats, who stayed up late baking cupcakes for third-grade bake sales, who skipped meals so he could have a birthday party with real balloons. He had space for everything, except the person who gave him the ground he stood on. I didn't go home. Not yet. The cab dropped me near the corner store, and I sat on the bench beside a flickering plastic snowman whose mechanical arm waved like it had forgotten why it ever started. My scarf was damp, my shoes pinched, but I stayed, watching the breath rise from my mouth like ghosts I couldn't name. I reached for my phone, thumb trembling, and tapped Ryan's number. Voicemail. His voice, calm, rehearsed, remote, told me to leave a message. I didn't. I just hung up and stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I stood and walked toward the bus stop. It wasn't bold. It wasn't brave. It was habit. It was what mothers do when there's still the faintest chance their child might open the door and say, "Come in." The ride to New Haven was quiet. The windows were fogged from inside, and outside the world blurred past. Wreaths on front doors, laughter spilling from restaurants, headlights glowing in puddles of snowmelt. I pressed my fingers to the glass. My knuckles looked older than I remembered, the veins more pronounced. I wondered when I'd last looked at my own hands and saw someone young. Ryan's house sat on a tree-lined street with trimmed hedges and Christmas lights strung with surgical precision. I remembered wiring him $15,000 for the down payment 5 years ago. "You saved my dream, Mom," he'd said, hugging me so tightly my ribs had ached for a day. Now I stood on his front step, unsure whether to knock once or twice. I chose twice. He opened the door wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, a baby monitor tucked under one arm. His eyes widened, surprised, but not in the way that meant joy, just confusion. "Mom, you didn't call." "I did," I said gently. "You didn't pick up." He hesitated. "It's not a good time." I gave a small, tired smile. "I understand. I got sick last week, spent more than I planned on medication. I was hoping I could stay just a few days. Until the 5th. I won't be a bother." His face shifted, softer lines replaced by sharper ones. "You're still strong, Mom," he said. "You could work a few hours a week. You can't just show up and expect to be taken care of." The words hit softly at first, then deeper, like snow piling on a roof until the beams groan under the weight. I didn't move. "Just tonight," I managed. "It's Christmas Eve. I'd like to see the kids. I'll leave in the morning." Ryan stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. "You've got Medicare, don't you? A pension? Why are you here, asking for help?" I blinked. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being his mother and started being a liability. He kept talking, his voice lower now, eyes flicking toward the lit windows behind him. "We're not set up for this, Mom. Janine wouldn't be okay with it. We barely have space. The kids are sick. It's not a good time." I looked at him, this grown man who once clung to my apron when he scraped his knee, who used to beg me to stay at the window until the school bus pulled away. Now he stood before me, arms crossed, as if I'd arrived to steal something rather than return something he'd forgotten. "I'll go," I said. The words surprised me, not because I said them, but because they didn't crack when they came out. He didn't ask if I needed help getting back, didn't offer a ride or even a blanket. He just stepped aside and muttered, "You should take care of yourself, Mom." I nodded and walked. Down the steps, across the pavement, past the glowing windows filled with warmth I no longer belonged to. He didn't follow. He didn't look back. I passed a nativity set in a neighbor's yard. Mary and Joseph huddled around the baby, their faces serene under soft white lights. I wanted to kneel beside them, to ask how they found shelter when I couldn't, but I just kept walking. Not because I was brave, because there was no door left to knock on. I don't remember the walk back to the bus stop. just the sound of my boots scraping frozen pavement and the way the wind seemed to find every gap in my coat. My hands had gone numb. The bill Michael gave me was still in my pocket, damp at the corners, curled like a leaf too long in the frost. When the bus arrived, I didn't speak to the driver. He didn't ask where I'd been. That silence felt like the only mercy left in the day. The ride back to Bridge Hill blurred by. I counted the stops in my head, not because I needed to, but because it gave me something to hold on to, something that felt like control. When I stepped off, the snow had picked up again, soft flakes spiraling down like everything I once believed about family. The walk to my house was slow. My legs didn't want to move. My back ached with every step. I leaned into the cold like it might hold me up. By the time I reached the front porch, my fingers could barely fish out the keys. The light above the door flickered once before blinking out completely. I stood in the dark a moment longer, listening to the wind skitter dead leaves across the steps. It sounded like laughter from far away. Inside, the house felt colder than I remembered, not just in temperature but in spirit. The kind of cold that sinks beneath skin and finds the quiet places in your bones. I left my coat on. It didn't make a difference. I checked the fridge, half a jar of mustard, 2 wrinkled apples, a bowl of plain rice I'd stretched across 3 meals. I didn't have the energy to chew. I closed the door gently and leaned against it until the hum of the motor filled my ears like a lullaby I didn't want. I moved through the house slowly, touching things I hadn't looked at in months. A chipped plate. A photo of the boys when they were 10 and 12, Michael with his arms slung around Ryan's shoulders, both of them grinning like they knew nothing of winter or bills or silence. I stood at the window. The neighbor's house glowed like a postcard. Inside, I saw shadows moving, laughter caught mid-motion, arms outstretched, someone lifting a glass in a toast. Grandparents, parents, children, all seated together under warm yellow light. I whispered to myself, just 2 more weeks. Pension comes on the 5th. You'll make it. But something inside sagged with those words, something that used to believe. I didn't turn on the heat, not that night. I couldn't afford it, not really. Instead, I lit 1 small lamp and climbed into bed without changing. The sheets were cold, stiff from the air. My left arm had been aching all week, sharp jolts near the shoulder like something grinding behind the bone. I had taken my last pain pill the night before, hoping it would stretch far enough to get me through Christmas. It hadn't. I lay there, still. The ceiling above me cracked like a map with no roads left. The bulb buzzed faintly, flickering in and out like it couldn't decide whether to hold on or let go. My breathing came short. I counted each rise and fall like a prayer, each second a bridge between 2 thoughts I didn't want to finish. Still, I didn't cry. Not for the pain. Not for the cold. The tears came later. Quietly. Not from my eyes, but from somewhere deeper. A kind of grief that doesn't need water, just memory. I remembered Christmases long ago, wrapping toys in old newspaper, folding edges so neatly you'd think they came from a store. I remembered hiding candy canes behind curtains and watching my boys search like it was treasure. I remembered Ryan's soft snore when he finally fell asleep beside the fire. I remembered thinking, this is worth every hour at the cannery, every aching wrist, every night shift. And now the fire was out. The tree was gone. The stockings still in a box under the bed where I hadn't reached since last year. And the bed? The bed felt like stone. I turned to my side, curled into myself, pulling the thin blanket to my chin. It didn't reach far, but it didn't matter. There were no more stories to tell, no more lights to turn off, no one left to whisper, "Merry Christmas, Mom." Only the wind tapping at the windows, only the ache in my joints, only the faintest echo of laughter that no longer belonged to me. I woke before the light, not because I'd rested, but because my back ached too much to let me sleep. My joints had stiffened overnight, knees that creaked like old floorboards, fingers curled as if they were trying to remember how to hold warmth. I sat on the edge of the bed, motionless, listening. There was nothing. No cars passing, no voices, not even the kettle humming in the kitchen. The whole house sat heavy around me, like it had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe in again. I pulled the curtain aside. Snow had blanketed everything, the rooftops, the mailboxes, even the crooked fence out back. It looked clean, soft, like the world had been given a second chance, but I didn't feel new. I felt used, wrung out and set aside like a rag no one wanted to throw away, but didn't care to use either. I stood slowly, each step a quiet protest. In the corner of the living room stood an old armoire. I hadn't opened it in years, not since before my husband passed, not since the boys still called just to hear my voice. Inside, behind a pile of mismatched tablecloths, was a tin box, light blue, rusted at the hinges. I pulled it out gently, as if I were afraid it might crumble. When I opened the lid, the smell of dust and old wood rose up like a forgotten song. Inside were things from another life. Bits of ribbon, dried leaves, cracked buttons, pieces of lace too short to do anything useful with. A pair of scissors dulled from time. A spool of raffia. A pouch of wooden beads, their colors faded to soft memory. I ran my fingers across them like they were old friends, fragile, familiar, slightly ashamed. These were the things I used to bring to craft nights at the factory. Back when women with calloused hands and tired feet gathered after hours to make something small, something theirs. Wreaths from scraps. Cards from clippings. Tiny bookmarks no one really needed, but each one made with the quiet hope that someone, somewhere, might want it. I hadn't touched this box in years. Not since I stopped believing anyone would look at what I made and see worth. But now, in the cold hush of the morning, with nothing left to lose, I whispered to the empty room, "These hands still work." And that was enough. I cleared the small wooden table near the window, brushed away the dust with the sleeve of my sweater. The light outside was still gray, but it crept in slowly, like it was curious. I took out the raffia, the beads, the scraps of old fabric, and began. My fingers moved stiffly at first. The joints protested. The scissors shook, but I didn't stop. I tied twine into little loops, pressed buttons onto cards, shaped dried leaves into rough petals and held them together with dots of glue that took longer than usual to dry. It wasn't for money. It wasn't for pride. It was for silence, so it wouldn't swallow me whole. The room filled with small things. Imperfect. Uneven. Some glue bled at the edges. Some knots refused to sit straight. But they were mine. Each one. By dusk, I had a modest collection. A handful of bookmarks, a tiny wreath, a few holiday cards glued from scrap magazine clippings. Nothing precious. Nothing polished. But they were proof that I had not disappeared entirely. I wrapped them gently in old newspaper, the kind with supermarket coupons I'd never use, and placed them in a canvas bag. Then I sat down. I looked at my hands, wrinkled, purpling at the joints, but covered in faint streaks of glue, tiny sparkles of glitter I hadn't even noticed falling. I didn't feel triumphant. But I didn't feel useless either. That night, I boiled tea leaves 3 times over to make them last, and sat by the window with my knees wrapped in a towel, watching the snow soften everything it touched. There were no carolers, no one called, no one came. But I had made something, and tomorrow I would go out, not to beg, but to offer what I had left. Because even forgotten mothers deserve to be remembered by their own hands. Saturday came with a gray sky that pressed low like an old thought too heavy to lift. I wrapped 2 sweaters around myself, layered my thickest socks, and pulled the wool cap down to my eyebrows. My knees ached just from the act of standing. But I stood anyway. I slung the canvas bag over my shoulder and walked to the bus stop without looking back. Not because I was brave, but because home had nothing else to offer me that morning. The Fairhill Market was a long strip of cracked concrete near the train station, rows of stalls patched together with tarp and folding tables. Some folks sold used books, others handmade soaps, vegetables bruised but still edible. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest. I found a corner near a rusted bike rack and laid out a piece of old cloth. On it, I arranged what I had made: bookmarks with mismatched buttons, cards with raffia bows, a tiny wreath made from torn ribbon and bits of dried fern. I tried to make it look inviting, neat, like something worth pausing for. At first, no one did. People walked by with their heads tucked into scarves, eyes fixed ahead. One man glanced down and muttered, "No one needs this kind of junk anymore," before disappearing into the crowd. I didn't argue. I just nodded, smiled faintly, whispered to myself, "It's okay. Someone will stop." But they didn't. Hours passed. The cold climbed from the ground into my legs like slow poison. My fingers stiffened. Even my thermos of tea had lost its warmth. Still, I stayed. Because leaving would have meant the silence had won. Then the rain came. Not soft, not poetic. The kind that slashes sideways. The kind that soaks through every promise you've ever folded into a paper bag. I scrambled to cover my crafts with the thin plastic sacks I'd brought, but they tore too easily. The paper cards warped in seconds. The fabric sagged under the weight of the water. One gust of wind lifted the cloth right off the ground, and half my display scattered into the gutter before I could catch it. I stood there, soaked to the bone, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the other holding a small beaded bracelet, one of the few pieces still intact. The glue had started to peel. The string was fraying. It dangled from my fingers like the last thread of who I used to be. I didn't cry, but I felt it in my throat, like a storm that wouldn't come out through tears. Only breathless silence. I gathered what I could, tucked it back into the canvas bag, now heavy with water, and stepped beneath the narrow awning of a florist shop. The windows were fogged, the lights inside off, closed. So I sat on the concrete, let the rain drip from my sleeves and the hem of my skirt, held the bracelet in my hand and whispered, not in anger, not in defeat, just simply, "At least I didn't ask anyone for anything." Then I heard footsteps. Not loud, just a steady shuffle. I looked up. It was her. A woman I'd seen before, 2 stalls down. Dark skin like aged mahogany, white braid tucked beneath a knitted cap. She sold scarves. Didn't speak. I'd heard the others say she was mute. She never gestured for attention, never waved her hands, just sat quietly with her yarn and her eyes that saw more than they let on. She knelt in front of me without saying a word. From her bag, she pulled out a paper cup. Steam curled from the top. Jasmine tea, I think. She held it out with both hands. I stared, stunned, then reached for it. Her hands lingered on mine for just a second longer than needed. And then she nodded once, firm like punctuation, and walked back to her stall, now half collapsed in the rain. I held that cup like it was sacred. The heat traveled up my arms, unthawing something I didn't realize had frozen. Not my skin, my dignity. It wasn't money. It wasn't praise. It was simply this. Someone had seen me fall and chosen not to look away. That night, I returned home dripping. The crafts were ruined, the glue melted, the ribbon torn. But I didn't throw them away. I laid each piece gently on the counter and wiped them one by one with a dish towel. Not because I thought they could be sold, but because I needed to believe they still mattered. Like I did. Even just a little. The next Saturday came like a repetition of the one before. Same dull sky, same wet sidewalks, same aching bones that protested every movement. I wore the same 2 sweaters, the same wool hat. The canvas bag was a little lighter this time, not because I'd sold anything, but because half of it hadn't survived the rain. Still, I went. I found my same corner, near the rusted bike rack, and spread out the cloth, drier now but still creased from being folded wet. I laid out what I'd salvaged, a few bookmarks, a handful of keychains, 2 greeting cards I'd ironed flat the night before. My fingers moved slower. The cold was deeper. For an hour, nothing. No glances, no words. Just the shuffle of boots on slush and the silence of people trying to get through winter without looking up. I was adjusting a frayed ribbon on one card when I heard it. A sharp thud. Not like something dropped. Like something heavy, someone had fallen hard. A gasp followed. Then nothing. I turned just in time to see a man collapse a few stalls down. His body didn't crumple. It slammed, like a door kicked open by a force stronger than gravity. He landed on his side, one arm twisted beneath him, the other twitching slightly. His coat was torn. Blood bloomed dark near his shoulder. For a moment, everything froze. People stood at a distance. No one moved. Someone murmured, "Oh God." Another voice, sharper, "Don't touch him. You don't know what that is." I looked around. Eyes turned away. One woman pulled her child closer, like sickness could leap across space. No one stepped forward. I didn't think. My legs moved before my mind did. I dropped to my knees beside him. The cold soaked through my jeans instantly. I reached for his uninjured shoulder, fingers shaking. "Sir?" I said gently. "Can you hear me?" No response, just shallow, ragged breaths, like each one took more effort than the last. His eyelids fluttered. His lips were pale. The blood was spreading fast, soaking into the thin cotton of his shirt beneath the coat. I reached for my phone. Dead. Of course. Panic pulsed hot in my throat. "Someone help me," I called out. "Please. He's bleeding. He's not waking up." Nothing. Just the sound of someone stepping back. And then, wheels. A soft creak. I turned. She was there. The woman with the scarves. Silent as always, eyes unreadable. She gave me one sharp nod and pushed her rolling cart toward us. Then she knelt beside me and pointed, her hand steady, her movement clear. "Help me lift him." We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Together we maneuvered the man, heavy, limp, half-conscious, onto the cart. He groaned once, a weak, breathless sound that barely counted as life. I wrapped his coat tighter. She pushed. I walked beside her, one hand on his arm so he wouldn't slide off. We moved fast as 2 old women could push through the uneven sidewalk. Every crack in the pavement jolted him. I whispered the whole way. Not to him, not to her, maybe to myself. "You're okay. We've got you, just a little farther." The clinic was 2 blocks away, tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat. I'd passed it before. Never gone in. That day, it was the only place that mattered. When we reached the door, I yanked it open and shouted for help. The receptionist dropped her pen. In seconds, 2 nurses appeared with a stretcher. They took one look at him and rushed into action. "Shoulder trauma," one of them said. "Possible internal bleeding." "You got him here just in time," the other added. Just in time. The words landed like a wave I didn't see coming. My knees buckled. I sank onto the bench outside the exam room, coat still damp, hands still trembling. The woman with the scarves sat beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't try to comfort, just sat there, present, solid. We waited. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Then the ambulance arrived. The nurses loaded him gently. Warming blankets. IV drip. Blood pressure monitor. One of them paused before closing the doors, looked at me and said, "You did good." Another 20 minutes and he wouldn't have made it. I didn't answer. I couldn't. We watched them drive away, the sirens fading into the gray. The woman stood, nodded once, then turned back toward the market, her cart empty now. I stayed. I sat there long after the door closed. Snow began to fall again, quiet flakes, soft as breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt something break the fog inside me. Not pride, not even relief. Something older, something like meaning. The hospital room was small, tucked in the back of the third floor, where the paint peeled slightly near the ceiling, and the windows stuck halfway when you tried to open them. Room 317. That's what the little whiteboard read, along with his name, Raymond. No last name, no visitors, no listed emergency contact. No one came. Not on the first day, when he lay unconscious under warming blankets. Not on the second, when the nurse whispered, "He's stable now, but we don't know for how long." Not even on the fifth, when I asked if he had any family at all. The nurse shook her head gently. "No calls, no insurance either. If no one steps in by next week, we may have to transfer him out." She didn't say where. She didn't have to. I knew what transfer meant for men like him, too injured to walk out, too forgotten to be fought for. That evening, I went home, back to my cold house and the tin box of ribbons and thread. I stood in the kitchen, the same cracked linoleum under my feet, the same hum from the refrigerator that sounded louder in silence. I didn't turn on the lights, just reached into the top drawer and pulled out a small wooden box, the one I hadn't touched since my husband passed. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, was my wedding ring. It was dull now, bent slightly along the edge, the engraving inside nearly worn away. But I ran my thumb across the groove where Henry's initials used to be. We'd picked it out at a local shop in Bridge Hill. He wanted something plain but strong. "Just like you," he'd said. I stood there a long time just looking at it. Then I walked to the pawn shop 2 blocks down. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions, just weighed it, scratched it once with a metal pin, and said, 16. I nodded. "That's fine." The next morning, I handed the cash to the woman at the billing desk. "Put it toward Raymond's account," I said. "Please." She blinked. "Are you family?" I shook my head. "No, just someone who cares." That afternoon, I walked back into room 317, carrying a small container of hot soup wrapped in a towel. Raymond was awake. Barely. His eyes fluttered open when I adjusted the blinds. "You're still here?" he asked, voice cracked like dry leaves. "I told you I would be." He blinked slowly, then looked toward the window. "Why?" I sat down, placed the soup on the tray, folded my hands in my lap. "Because I know what it feels like," I said, quiet but steady, to have no one show up. He didn't speak after that, just nodded. Once, like it hurt too much to do more. I came back the next day, and the day after that. I sat beside his bed with my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, listened to the slow beep of the monitor, wiped his brow when the fever returned, hummed old lullabies I hadn't sung since my boys were small and needed nothing more than a rhythm and a hand to feel safe. Raymond didn't tell me much, only that his shoulder hurt, that he used to drive trucks, that he'd once had a company, small, nothing fancy, that it disappeared the same year he did. He didn't ask for pity, neither did I. But something passed between us in that room. Something that didn't need blood to feel like family. Sometimes, when he drifted off mid-sentence, I'd just sit quietly and count his breaths, like I had with my children when they were babies, making sure each inhale came slow and sure, like proof that life was still holding on. One night, as I was gathering my coat to leave, he reached out, fingers weak but deliberate. "I don't want to be a burden," he said, "but I don't know where else to go." I looked at his hand, then into his eyes, gray, like winter sky. "You're not a burden," I replied, then paused. "Come home with me. We'll figure it out." He hesitated, just for a moment, then said something so soft I barely caught it. "I've never had a mother who stayed." I didn't flinch, didn't correct him. I just placed my hand over his and gave it a gentle squeeze. That was enough. Raymond moved into the small back room down the hallway, the one with the drafty window and the lampshade that leaned a little to the left. He called it cozy. Said it was the nicest place he'd stayed in years. I didn't argue. I just made sure there were extra blankets and a fresh bar of soap on the sink. The first morning, I woke to the smell of toast. He was in the kitchen, struggling to open a jar of jam with one arm. "I was trying to surprise you," he grinned. "You did," I said, smiling. "You didn't even burn it." We ate at the table together, just the two of us, and Lucky, the cat, curled beneath our feet. The snow outside had stopped, leaving everything covered in a soft hush, as if the world had paused long enough to let us catch our breath. He helped with little things, repaired the loose tile in the bathroom, rewired the porch light, carried groceries when my knees ached too much to manage stairs. In the evenings, he boiled water for my foot soak, wrapped the heating pad around my shoulder without being asked. "You saved my life," he said once, drying the dishes. "No," I replied gently. "We just found each other." And that was true. We didn't talk much about the past. He never told me exactly what had happened before the market. I never asked. You could see the weight he carried, shadows in his expression, silences that stretched longer than necessary. But I understood, because I had my own. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear him cough through the wall, or talk softly in his sleep, words blurred like prayers meant for someone long gone. I'd stand by his door with my hand resting on the frame, not to interrupt, not to fix, just to let him know he wasn't alone anymore. And one day, it slipped out. "Son, don't forget your scarf, it's freezing." He turned and looked at me, not shocked, just still. Then nodded once later that night as we fed Lucky. He murmured, "Thanks, Mom." Like the word had always been there. I didn't correct him. I didn't cry. I just let it settle into the air like something we both finally had a right to say. It was a Wednesday in early March when the doorbell rang. I was sitting near the window, stitching blue forget-me-nots into the corner of a pillowcase I had meant to give away last Christmas. Raymond was in the yard, humming an old tune I never asked him the name of. When I looked up, I froze. Michael and Ryan were standing at the gate. Their suits were too new, their eyes too tired. Between them, they held a pink bakery box, like some apology could be tucked between pecans and icing. I didn't go to the door, didn't rise, didn't call out. The security guard we'd hired after Raymond insisted we have one stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he said. "Mrs. Whitman isn't receiving visitors today." They tried to speak, hands gesturing, brows furrowed, but I didn't listen. I just watched from behind the lace curtain as they slowly turned and walked back down the path, shoulders hunched, not with snow this time, but with consequence. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. What I felt was peace. Not the kind that arrives with answers, but the kind that comes when the questions stop mattering. Later that afternoon, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my knees. Raymond handed me a cup of tea, mint and chamomile, just like the day before. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I took a sip. Let the warmth fill my mouth before I answered. "No," I said, "because this time I chose who gets to sit at my table." He smiled. The wind passed through the garden gently, like it didn't want to disturb anything. Lucky dozed in a patch of sunlight near our feet. The sea beyond the trees glimmered faintly, and the rocking chair creaked beneath me like an old friend sighing. And I thought, no, this is not the family I gave birth to. But it is the family that stayed. Sometimes blood forgets you, but kindness never does. Spring came slowly to the coast. It didn't rush in like a triumph. It crept, quiet, cautious, testing the air. The snow melted in patches. The wind lost its bite. One morning, I looked out and saw crocuses pushing through the soil near the porch steps. I hadn't planted them. Raymond said maybe the earth remembered something I didn't. Life in the house followed a rhythm. Simple. Predictable. Raymond read the paper every morning aloud, his voice steady even when the news wasn't. I kept sewing. Napkins, pillow edges, the corner of a curtain that had frayed from the sun. Lucky followed us from room to room like a child too content to wander far. There were no big gestures, no grand conversations, just presence. Just two people who had once been left behind, finding something soft and solid in the way their lives now overlapped. Then, one morning in May, the bell rang again. I didn't move to answer it, not right away. I already knew. Through the lace curtain, I saw them, Michael and Ryan, standing outside the gate. Not in suits this time, but in windbreakers. Their faces were thinner, their eyes tired in a different way. The kind of tired that comes when even pride doesn't know what to say anymore. I didn't go to the door. I didn't stand. Raymond reached over and gently turned the kettle off before it could whistle. We both sat there, unmoving, as the security guard stepped forward again. "I'm sorry," he said. "Mrs. Whitman isn't seeing visitors today." Michael opened his mouth as if to protest, then stopped. Ryan looked toward the window, almost as if he knew I was behind it. I was. But I didn't wave. Didn't signal. Didn't blink. I just watched. They turned and walked back to their car. Slower this time, not defeated, but understanding that the gate wasn't locked. It was simply closed. And not every door left open was meant for them. That evening, I sat on the porch, a blanket across my knees, the smell of mint tea curling through the air. Raymond joined me, carrying 2 cups. He didn't ask about them. He never did. We drank in silence, the kind that didn't feel empty, just full of everything that didn't need to be said. Across the yard, the sun dipped low, turning the sky a shade of gold I hadn't seen in years. Lucky stretched lazily on the step, one paw flicking in a dream. The wind moved through the trees like it was humming something meant only for us. "I never thought I'd find this," I said quietly. "Find what?" Raymond asked. "A place where I wasn't someone's regret," I answered. He didn't respond with words, just reached over and held my hand, lightly, but like it had always been his to steady. And as the last of the light faded, I thought, this is not the life I planned. Not the family I raised. But it is the family that stayed.